My name is Riley Foster, I am 27 years old, and I still remember the exact second the ground shifted under me in that quiet cul-de-sac in Rochester, Minnesota. It was a gray Tuesday morning when I opened the manila folder my aunt had left on my kitchen counter the night before, claiming it was just old family paperwork she wanted me to sort. Inside were bank statements I had never seen, medical summaries stamped with my former clinic's logo, and a string of emails that made the coffee in my throat turn cold. The numbers did not match anything I had lived. The diagnoses did not match the healthy twins sleeping in the next room. And every single page carried my mother's careful, looping signature in the approval box. If you have ever opened a drawer and found the proof that the people who were supposed to protect you had been quietly rewriting your life, you already know the particular silence that follows. Hit that notification bell if you want the rest of this story, because what came next changed every ordinary morning I thought I still owned. I set the folder down and walked to the sliding door that looked out over the small backyard. Lily and Grace were still asleep, two dark-haired 5-year-olds who had never known any version of family except the one I had built alone after Justin Parker and I ended things 4 years earlier. I had told myself the ending was mutual, that the financial pressure and the sudden medical concerns about my stress levels had simply been too much for both of us. That was the story I had repeated until it felt true. The emails in the folder told a different story. My aunt had written to my mother in language so precise it felt practiced. If we adjust the prenatal notes and the projected household debt figures, he will walk away on his own. She will never have to know we guided the outcome. My mother's reply was shorter. Do it cleanly. She has always been too soft for the kind of future she thinks she wants. I read those lines 3 times. Then I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet and let the quiet of the house press in around me. An hour later the girls woke up. I made oatmeal the way they liked it, with the brown sugar stirred in while it was still hot, and I listened to them argue gently about which stuffed animal got to sit at the table. Their voices were the only normal sound left in the world. When they asked why my eyes looked tired, I told them Mommy had stayed up reading, which was true enough. After I dropped them at the small preschool 3 blocks away, I drove straight to the office of Danielle Brooks, the family lawyer a coworker had recommended the year before when I updated my will. Danielle listened without interrupting while I laid the folder on her desk. She turned pages slowly, her expression staying carefully neutral until she reached the altered lab summaries. These are not just mistakes, she said at last. Someone changed dates and values after the fact. And the financial projections your mother approved never matched the actual accounts you and Justin held. I can have a private investigator start tracing the original files today if you want that. I said yes. Cole Ramirez called me that same afternoon. His voice was calm, almost bored, the way people sound when they have already seen worse. He asked for every password I could remember from the old shared accounts and for permission to contact the clinic where I had received prenatal care. I gave him both. Then I drove home, parked in the driveway of the modest 2-story house I had bought with my own savings, and sat in the car for a long time watching the maple tree in the front yard move in the wind. That evening my mother called. I let it go to voicemail the first 2 times. On the 3rd ring I answered. Riley, your aunt said you found the folder, she began, voice smooth and faintly impatient. There are things you do not understand about the decisions we made when you were younger. You were not in a position to see the whole picture. I kept my tone even. Then explained the whole picture. There was a pause just long enough to feel calculated. Justin was never going to provide the stability you needed. The numbers we showed him were simply a clearer version of the truth. And the medical notes only emphasized what the doctors were already concerned about, your anxiety levels. The risk to the pregnancy if you stayed under that much pressure. We protected you. You altered records, I said. We adjusted emphasis, she corrected. There is a difference. I ended the call before I said anything I would have to carry later. 2 days later Cole Ramirez sent a preliminary report. The original prenatal blood work had been completely ordinary. The debt figures my mother and aunt had presented to Justin had been inflated by nearly $80,000 through a series of fabricated credit inquiries and backdated statements. The emails between them went back further than I expected, 6 months before the twins were even conceived. The promised future my mother had spoken about so often when I was engaged, the one that included family support and a clear path forward, had never existed except as a story she told to keep me compliant. I printed the report and put it in the same manila folder. Then I sat at the kitchen table after the girls were in bed and read every page again under the soft light of the single pendant lamp. The next morning my aunt arrived unannounced. She stood on the front step in a neat navy coat, holding a bakery bag as if this were any ordinary visit. I did not invite her in. "Your mother is worried," she said. "She thinks you are making this into something larger than it needs to be. Families make hard choices for each other." That is all that happened. I looked at her for a long moment. "You wrote the emails that told her how to adjust the numbers so Justin would leave." Her mouth tightened. "I wrote what was necessary. You have 2 healthy children and a quiet life. Stop digging for reasons to be ungrateful." I closed the door without answering. That night I called Justin. We had not spoken in almost 3 years. His voice on the other end was careful, the way people sound when they are bracing for old pain. I told him only that new information had surfaced about the financial documents and the medical summaries that had ended us. I did not ask him to come back. I did not apologize for the years. I simply said I thought he deserved to know the version we had both been given was incomplete. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I kept copies of everything they showed me. If you need them, I still have the folder." I thanked him and hung up. The following week Danielle Brooks filed a formal request for the original clinic records. Cole Ramirez kept working. My mother called twice more and left messages that mixed concern with quiet warnings about airing private family matters. My aunt sent a long text about loyalty and the cost of stirring up the past. I did not answer either of them. On a Thursday afternoon while the girls were at a neighbor's house for a short playdate, I sat on the back steps of the house and watched the light move across the small lawn. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint metal scent of the nearby river. I thought about the version of myself who had once believed the future my mother described was real. That version had trusted the signatures and the careful explanations. That version had let the relationship end because the numbers and the medical concerns looked too solid to fight. I was still sitting there when my phone buzzed with a new message from Cole Ramirez. The subject line read simply, "Original files recovered. You need to see this." I opened the attachment. The first page was a lab report dated 4 years earlier, completely clean, no elevated markers, no risk notations. The second page was an internal clinic email from a nurse I had never met, questioning why corrected values had been entered under my name after the fact. The third page was a wire transfer from an account controlled by my aunt into a private consulting firm that specialized in document clarification services. I closed the phone and rested my forehead against my knees. Inside the house the silence felt different now, less like emptiness and more like a space that had finally been cleared of someone else's story. Lily and Grace would be home in an hour. I would make dinner. I would listen to them talk about their day. And somewhere underneath those ordinary motions I would begin deciding what kind of boundary was strong enough to keep the people who had rewritten my life from rewriting anything else. The investigation was only starting to pull the rest of the threads into the light. My mother still believed she could explain it away. My aunt still believed loyalty meant silence. I stood up, brushed the dust from the back of my jeans, and went inside to set the table for 3. I set 3 places at the small kitchen table and listened to the ordinary sounds of the house settling into evening, the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking above the stove. Lily and Grace came home from the playdate 20 minutes later, cheeks pink from running and voices full of the small dramas that only 5-year-olds can make feel enormous. I served the pasta I had thrown together, answered their questions about whether cats could dream, and let the rhythm of their chatter fill the spaces the folder had opened. After baths and the usual negotiation over one more story, I sat on the edge of Grace's bed until both girls' breathing evened out. Only then did I open the message from Cole Ramirez again and read the attached files a second time under the hallway light. The original lab work was clean. The corrected values that had appeared in the version shown to Justin had been entered by someone using an administrative login tied to a consulting firm my aunt had paid 3 months before the twins were born. Cole's note at the bottom was brief. He had already requested the firm's billing records and expected a fuller picture within the week. I slept in short stretches that night, waking each time to the same quiet certainty that the life I had been living was built on a set of numbers and notes that had never belonged to me. The next morning I called Danielle Brooks before the girls woke. She agreed to meet me during her lunch hour. I dropped Lily and Grace at preschool, drove the short distance to her office on the edge of downtown Rochester, and sat across from her while she reviewed the new pages. "These changes were deliberate," she said, tapping one of the corrected lab lines. "And the consulting firm specializes in what they call narrative alignment for private clients. That is not a medical service. That is document work. If Cole can pull the payment trail, we will have a clear path to show intent." I asked her what the practical next step looked like. She recommended a formal letter to the clinic requesting a complete audit of my file and a simultaneous notice to my mother and aunt that any further contact regarding the twins' medical history would go through counsel. I authorized both. On the drive home I stopped at the small park near the cul-de-sac and sat on a bench for 10 minutes, watching a pair of joggers pass and trying to decide how much of this the girls ever needed to know. The answer, for now, was nothing. They were 5. Their world still fit inside oatmeal and stuffed animals and the reliable fact that I showed up every afternoon. 2 days later Cole called while I was folding laundry. His voice carried a new edge of focus. "The consulting firm kept records," he said. "Your aunt authorized 3 separate document revisions. 1 set of financial projections, 2 sets of prenatal summaries. The invoices were paid from a joint account she shares with your mother. I also recovered an internal email chain where they discussed the timing, specifically that the revised files needed to reach Justin before the end of the first trimester so the decision would feel medical rather than personal." I thanked him and asked him to send everything to Danielle. After I hung up I stood in the middle of the living room with a half-folded towel in my hands and felt the last of the old story dissolve. The version in which Justin had simply been overwhelmed by numbers and risk had never been true. The version in which I had failed to hold the relationship together under pressure had never been true either. Both of us had been handed a script written by the 2 women who claimed to want the best for me. That evening my mother arrived without warning. I opened the front door to find her standing on the step in a pressed blouse, holding a small potted plant as if this were a social call. Lily and Grace were already in their pajamas, watching a short cartoon in the living room. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me so their voices would not carry. "I know you have been speaking with lawyers," she said. Her tone was calm, almost gentle. "There are pieces of this you still do not have. I am willing to explain them if you will stop treating us like strangers." I waited. She set the plant on the porch railing. "Your aunt and I saw the pattern early. Justin's family had a history of financial instability that never appeared on the surface. The projections we prepared simply made that history visible in language a young man could understand. And the medical notes, yes, we emphasized certain risk factors. But the underlying concern was real. You were exhausted. You were carrying twins. We believed a cleaner break would protect the children more than a marriage held together by optimism." I looked at her for a long moment. "You paid a firm to change the numbers after the fact. We paid a firm to present the clearest possible picture," she answered. "There is a difference between fabrication and clarification. I am not proud of the method, but I stand by the intention." The partial admission hung between us in the cool evening air. She had admitted the revisions. She had not admitted the lie. I told her any further conversation would go through Danielle Brooks and went back inside without taking the plant. The following week the clinic responded to Danielle's formal request. Their internal audit confirmed that 2 sets of values in my prenatal file had been overwritten using an external administrative credential. The original entries remained in a backup system the clinic had not previously checked. Dr. Sophia Nguyen, the pediatric specialist who had followed the twins since birth, called me personally after reviewing the audit summary. Her voice was careful and professional. The original laboratory data shows no elevated markers of the kind that appeared in the revised summaries, she said. I cannot speak to why the changes were made, but I can confirm they do not reflect the clinical picture I have seen in either of your daughters. If you need a written statement for legal purposes, I will provide one. I thanked her and added her name to the growing list of people who now held pieces of the real record. Justin sent his folder by courier the same afternoon. Inside were the exact documents my mother and aunt had given him 4 years earlier, financial projections showing debt that had never existed and medical summaries that no longer matched the clinic's backup files. He included a short note. He had kept everything because something about the timing had never felt right, but he had not known how to question it at the time. I read the note twice, then placed the entire packet with the rest of the evidence. My aunt's next approach came by text, longer and sharper than before. She wrote that I was endangering the only family the girls had left, that digging up old decisions would only create confusion and distance, and that loyalty required accepting the imperfect choices adults sometimes made for the people they loved. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Danielle without replying. The pressure settled into a steady rhythm. My mother left 2 more voicemails, each one mixing concern with quiet warnings about the cost of public family conflict. Cole continued tracing the consulting firm's other clients. Danielle prepared a formal demand letter seeking written acknowledgement of the alterations and a permanent boundary around any future medical or financial representations involving the twins. On a quiet Thursday evening after the girls were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with every document spread in careful order. The original lab reports. The revised versions. The invoices. The emails. The financial projections that had never matched any real account. Looking at them together, the shape of the decision became unmistakable. My mother and aunt had not reacted to a crisis. They had manufactured the appearance of one so that the outcome they preferred would look inevitable. My phone lit up with a new email from Cole Ramirez. The subject line read, "Final payment records and internal memo recovered." I opened it. The first attachment was a clear transfer from the joint account into the consulting firm on the exact date the revised prenatal summaries had been created. The second attachment was a short internal memo from the firm itself, noting that the client had requested maximum persuasive clarity and that the adjusted figures should be delivered before any further medical appointments. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and walked down the short hallway to check on Lily and Grace one more time. Their faces in the soft glow of the nightlight looked exactly as they always had, unaware, safe, still belonging only to the version of the story I had managed to protect. Outside, the cul-de-sac was completely still. Somewhere beyond the maple trees my mother and aunt were still deciding how much of the truth they were willing to claim. The formal demand letter would reach them in the morning. I did not know yet what they would do when the paper arrived. I only knew that the quiet house around me no longer felt like a place built on someone else's numbers. The formal demand letter reached my mother and my aunt the next morning. I know the exact timing because Danielle Brooks called me at 9:14 while I was packing the girls' lunches and told me both women had already responded through the same attorney. Their joint reply was brief. They denied any intent to deceive, described the revisions as protective clarifications, and requested a private family meeting before any further legal steps. I told Danielle there would be no private meeting. 3 days later, the full payment records and the internal memo from the consulting firm arrived in a single secure file from Cole Ramirez. The memo used the phrase maximum persuasive clarity. The invoices matched the dates of every altered document. Danielle forwarded the complete package to the clinic's compliance office and to Dr. Sophia Nguyen, who provided a concise written statement confirming that the original laboratory values had never supported the risk language that appeared in the revised summaries. On a quiet Monday afternoon, I met my mother in Danielle's conference room. My aunt did not attend. My mother sat with her hands folded on the table, posture perfect, expression carefully composed. Danielle placed the original lab reports, the revised versions, the invoices, and the memo in a neat stack between us. My mother looked at the papers for a long time before she spoke. "I will not pretend the method was ideal," she said. "But I will not apologize for wanting a different life for you than the one you were about to choose. Justin's people had patterns. You were young. The twins deserved stability that did not depend on optimism." I kept my voice level. "You paid strangers to change medical numbers and invent debt so that the man I loved would leave. Then you watched me raise 2 children alone while you called it protection." She met my eyes. "I stand by the outcome even if I dislike the tools." That was the last conversation we had in person. Danielle filed a civil request for a formal written acknowledgement of the alterations and a permanent injunction against any further representations concerning the twins' medical or financial history. My mother and my aunt signed the acknowledgement 6 weeks later. They admitted the documents had been revised. They did not admit malice. The court record now contains the originals, the revisions, the invoices, and the memo. That record is enough. I did not seek damages. I did not release the story to anyone outside the necessary professionals. Silence, I had learned, could be a boundary as solid as any legal order. Justin and I spoke once more by phone after the acknowledgement was filed. He thanked me for the truth. We agreed the past did not need to become a present. He has never asked to meet the girls, and I have never offered. Some doors close cleanly when both people finally see the same set of facts. Life in the cul-de-sac returned to its small, steady shape. Lily and Grace still argued about stuffed animals and still required the exact shade of brown sugar in their oatmeal. I still walked them to preschool and still sat on the back steps after they slept. The difference was the absence of the old story. I no longer carried the quiet belief that I had somehow failed to hold a relationship together under ordinary pressure. The pressure had never been ordinary. 2 new people entered the edges of our days during those months. Claire Donovan, the neighbor 2 houses down, began watching the girls for short afternoons when I needed to meet Danielle or sign papers. She asked no questions beyond the practical ones and never treated the arrangement as gossip. Mark Sullivan, the clinic's records officer who had supervised the final audit, called once to confirm that my file had been permanently annotated with the original values and that any future request would reflect only the verified data. Their presence was ordinary and limited and exactly sufficient. My mother sent one final letter 3 months after the acknowledgement. It arrived on heavy cream paper and contained a single paragraph about family legacy and the cost of permanent distance. I read it once, placed it in the same manila folder with the rest of the evidence, and did not reply. My aunt stopped texting. The annual family gatherings I had once driven 3 hours to attend simply ceased to include me. No one announced the decision. The invitations simply stopped arriving. I felt the loss in the way a person feels a room grow quieter after a familiar voice leaves it. I also felt the relief of no longer bracing for the next careful explanation that would reframe control as care. Detachment, I discovered, is not the same as bitterness. It is the decision to stop offering the people who rewrote your life any further pages to edit. The girls are 6 now. They know they have a grandmother and a great-aunt who live in another city. They know those women are not part of the ordinary rhythm of school mornings and weekend pancakes. They do not ask for more detail, and I do not supply it. Some truths protect the people who still need ordinary days more than they need complete histories. I still live in the same quiet house on the same quiet cul-de-sac. The maple tree still drops its leaves every October. The folder of original records sits in a locked drawer I rarely open. On most evenings the loudest sound in the house is 2 little girls negotiating the terms of one more story before sleep. I chose the version of my life that no longer required me to doubt my own memory. I chose the silence that keeps their childhood free of adult revisions. I chose the boundary that ends every conversation the moment it tries to become a justification. Thank you for listening to my story. Would you choose yourself if the people who claimed to protect you had already rewritten the facts?